Hello and welcome. We're chatting with Suchetna Ray, who is the editor of Outlook Business Magazine, and she's going to tell us what's inside the latest issue, which is also the anniversary issue of Outlook Business Magazine.
Hi, it is the 16th anniversary of Outlook Business. It's a very special edition that we put together. I hope the readers will like reading it as much as we did while putting it together. The cover story is about successors, and by successors we mean signs of legacy family businesses, their way of doing business versus the way we see startups coming up, unicorn founders' way of doing business.
So a rivalry seems to be brewing in the public domain between startup founders and science or successors. What do you make of this rivalry? Is it real?
Well, I'll put two data sets in front of you to figure whether it's real or not. One is that we have to remember that 70% of India's GDP is drawn from businesses which are led by family, legacy family. The other data point is that in the last 1 year, we saw, just last 1 year alone, we saw $41 billion flowing into the startup sector. There were 42 to 44 unicorns that emerged, making the sector the toast of policymakers, of actually global VCs as well. Now, what we need to ponder upon is that we have to remember that India is really an outlier when it comes to family-held businesses. Why outlier is because it's only in India that you see the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few family businesses the way we see it here. Most developed countries, family businesses do not last beyond the second generation. Third generation are exceptions. Fourth, there are very few examples. In India, actually, the percentage of that is much higher. There are lots of family businesses which actually run into the fourth generation. So the trust, the legacy of these family businesses is very high. But they've never had it this tough doing business in India ever. Some of the family businesses, the Tatas, the Birlas, the Bajajes, they date back to a time from before independence. They have found ways of adapting challenges that every decade has thrown up. Challenges which are challenges of globalization, internal challenges, liberalization, policy challenges, name it, and they've managed to overcome them, also diversify and look at newer growth areas. What is happening now is very different, something which is a curveball that they're not always able to negotiate very well with. One is that the nature of globalization is changing. Second, the cost of capital is very high. We are going through a phase which has been a very long phase of downturn. Third is the emergence of tech-driven startups. They have won our hearts because they solve a problem which is really the last mile problem that consumers face in a way that legacy businesses have never looked at it. They thought, legacy businesses again, that proximity with political masters is the way to do business. But the unicorn founders are riding a different unicorn altogether, which is entirely digital. And in India, the pandemic has ensured that all of us, we've leapfrogged into digitization much faster. So yes, there is a huge competition, and that's exactly why you see these science or family businesses, all of them with very elite education, who also have a different viewpoint of life because they've grown up abroad, have had a different initiation, try their hand at startups, which is very different from what the family does. But again, if you look at the science that we've covered in this issue, you'll see that their areas of interest in some way or the other ties up very broadly to what the family does.
So are these science well equipped, because they've clearly got everything going for them, but are they well equipped to start their own ventures or their own startups?
They are very well equipped. Look at the Ambani science. You read about them in the newspaper very, very often. You also read about the unicorn founders very often. Look at the kind of adulation, say, a Vijay Shekhar Sharma gets. Look at the adulation maybe whenever the India head of Amazon is here gets. So these are two very different sets of people. Yes, we see family business science also trying to break away from the family businesses and start up on their own, because they realize that the call of the new economy is going to be tech-led. They have the education that you want. They've been educated abroad, they've interned at maybe at the Bay Area itself, so, and they have the money, they have the last name, but what they don't have is perhaps the hustle culture. They perhaps do not have the tenacity that you see startup founders have. Startup founders, mind you, are mostly, if you do a survey, you'll see mostly are IITians and IIMs, so therefore they also have very elite education, but they know the grind. They do not have a last name to fall back on. It is for them a world of hustle from the word go. They also know that the legacy scion, while they'll have a family to fall back on, they'll have the family business to fall back on, which they will not have. They also, the legacy science, they also have access to capital. These guys don't have that. So they have to prove themselves at every point to ensure that they get the attention of the global VCs. All of that improves their competitive edge much higher than the science.
So startup founders in India, they come from across the nation, they come from across classes. Some have good education, like you said, some don't. What makes global funds, global investors pick startup founders over successors?
Okay, the two parts of the question. First of all, yeah, it's a very new phenomenon that we saw in 2021 where you had unicorn founders who have not gone to an IIT or IIM, because most of the founders, again, if you do a survey, you'll see 95 to 96%, as high as that, are IITians and IIM graduates. So they have elite education, but we've covered a startup called Physics Wala. Alak Pandey actually grew up in the slums of Allahabad. That is happening because of the kind of money that is flowing into the ecosystem. Some call it the democratization of entrepreneurship. I won't go that far to stick my head out to saying that there has been a complete democratization, but you have the attention of global VCs, because for global VCs, they're answerable to their LPs. They want they want very high returns in a very short period of time, and they know they can bet on the startup sector for it. Can they bet on the science? Again, there are two ways of looking at it. These science also have the backing of the family. They're not always dependent on the VCs, A. B, they have a certain way of doing business which they have learned through generations. Their families, it's been given down to them through generations of their family. So therefore, maybe a VC will not be able to trust them as much they would a startup founder. These startup founders do not have famous last names. They in fact do not even have a business backing to start with. So therefore, they'll be more agile to a VC's recommendation than maybe a Birla chap or an Ambani chap would. So that is why they look at that. A. B, the kind of rigor that a startup founder can go through, you can never trust a scion to go through that. Imagine Kavin Mittal, I'll give an example. He started up Hike. Hike didn't do very well. There was a messenger that was supposed to take on WhatsApp, got decimated by WhatsApp. He's now moved to trying his hand at a gaming platform. Compare him to, say, the founder of Gupshup. He's made Gupshup work. That's the difference, and that's what VCs want to bet on.
Okay. And what other stories can readers look forward to in this August issue of the magazine?
It's a very large cover package that we have, multiple stories which tell which talk about the rivalry between family business science and startup founders, especially unicorn founders. We also have 6 profiles: Nirvan Birla, Shruti Shibula, Tara Singh Vachani, Anandjit Singh's daughter, part of the science, who have risen and who are trying to do something very different from what the family has done so far. We have 3 more startup founders, all unicorns. Girish Mathrubootham, Freshworks. He's actually speaking to a media organization, the first time since Freshworks listed at NASDAQ. You have Physics Wala, fascinating story of a slum dweller actually moving up to launching a unicorn. We also have the story of Misho, which is the toast of the startup sector. Really, apart from that, there's a very fascinating story about the rise of Gautam Adani, how he has managed to take his companies to the market, capitalize the market in a way that despite not having underlying projects at all time, he's managed to remain the darling of the markets. How does he do that? That's the story that we have. There's a story of the fight between the center and the states that's brewing, and all of it, this fight, behind it is an RBI report. That's an interesting story. We have very good columns this time, Arun Bharatram, who's the patriarch of the SRF family. The SRF family is a breakaway offshoot of the DCM family of Delhi. DCMs were at one point in time known as the Tatas of North. It's a fascinating column that he's written about the evolution of India Inc. Since 1960s, since the time he took over. So all of that put together, yes, I'm guessing it's an anniversary. It's a 16th anniversary issue of Outlook Business, and I'm guessing the readers will find it as special as we found it while putting it together.